Hi, I'm Micah Halpern. Thank you for joining me today as I do some thinking out loud. Our first segment is called Background Briefing. The first thing I've been thinking about is the White House's new strategy to combat anti-Semitism. On the eve of Shavuot, the Biden White House unveiled an unprecedented national strategy to fight Jew hatred. This initiative is called, quote, the U.S. National Strategy to Counter Anti-Semitism, unquote. This is a step in the right direction. Any way that the power of the U.S. government is willing to lend itself to the effort to combat Jew hatred is appreciated. It can potentially have a significant impact down the rocky road of hatred. The best plan, of course, is one that involves educating the young and the impressionable. In a recorded video message, President Joe Biden said that his plan sends a, quote, clear and forceful message. He continued and said, in America, evil will not win, hate will not prevail. And then he added, the venom and violence of anti-Semitism will not be the story of our time, unquote. The 60-page list all kinds of ideas, 100 different items to be implemented to fight Jew hatred. The list really falls into several rubrics. Most important, I think, is increasing awareness and understanding of anti-Semitism, which includes its threat to America and learning more about Jewish history. The plan also includes bolstering security for Jewish communities and Jewish institutions. The hardest part of the plan to implement will be the goal of reversing the normalization of anti-Semitism. That's hard. And finally, there is building cross-community bridges to fight all forms of hate across the United States. There's some criticisms of that. At the rollout, Susan Rice, Biden's chief domestic policy advisor, who has since resigned, cited a shocking study that reported 85% of Americans believe at least one anti-Semitic stereotype. She called it unacceptable. Deborah Lipstadt, Biden's ambassador to monitor and combat anti-Semitism, was particularly profound and poignant in her comments. Lipstadt said that this was a historic moment in the modern fight against what's known as the fight against the world's oldest hatred. She said, where anti-Semitism persists, democracy suffers. I am hopeful that this initiative will make a difference. For years, experts have discussed the reasons why people hate Jews. One suggestion is ignorance and lack of education. Another is jealousy. Others assert that religious animus is the root cause of the oldest hatred, Jew hatred. This plan will not solve the problem. This plan will not eliminate Jew hatred. This plan might, however, make a small difference. And however small that difference will be, I appreciate the effort that's being made. I hope that others like me will express their appreciation. We Jews cannot solve this gargantuan, age-old problem alone. If we could, anti-Semitism would have been eradicated a long time ago. Instead, it is rearing its fury-filled, ugly head across the United States with frequency, and for that matter, across the world. This battle requires the masses to stand up and work together to combat this hatred. Israel's ambassador to the United States, Michael Herzog, tweeted his appreciation to the Biden administration. Herzog's tweet reads, I would like to congratulate the Biden administration for publishing the first ever national strategy to combat anti-Semitism. Thank you, at POTUS, for prioritizing the need to confront anti-Semitism in all its forms. We welcome the re-embracing of the IHRA definition, which is the gold standard definition of anti-Semitism. Less than a century after the Holocaust, rising anti-Semitism in America across the globe is cause for alarm. This report is an important step in the long fight against this venomous hate, unquote. Jonathan Greenblatt, the CEO of ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, has been quoted as saying, as the U.S. Jewish community is experiencing anti-Semitism at levels not seen in generations, we deeply appreciate that the White House has stepped up and delivered the significant, comprehensive strategy. It's particularly notable that this approach recognizes that anti-Semitism is not about politics. It's about principles. We are pleased that this strategy comprehensively addresses hate and anti-Semitism on campus, online and from extremists on both the far right and the far left. Jean-Paul Sartre, in his still powerful and insightful essay entitled Anti-Semite and Jew, explains that the anti-Semite has created the Jew as a target of hate. The Jew represents everything that the anti-Semite loathes. That hatred is so deep and profound that even though they might love democracy, that is, the anti-Semite might love democracy, the anti-Semite does not even realize that their hatred is destroying the very society that they love. Sartre argues that this hatred is a passion and a deep-seated emotion. He explains that to the anti-Semite, the hatred is not a common idea in the common sense of the word. It's not a point of view which is rational. It is, first of all, a passion. Sartre tells the story of his high school friend who was livid at the fact that he failed the French poetry test and the Jew, son of Eastern European immigrants, had passed. The young man's anger was vicious and so very visceral. He wonders how a Jew could understand French poetry better than he, a true Frenchman. And then the truth. Sartre gets his classmate to admit that he failed because he did not study and that it had nothing to do with the Jew. Rather than accept the blame he alone deserved, he transferred his anger and frustration to the ready scapegoat, the Jewish classmate. Jew hatred will not disappear, but the more non-Jews who join in the battle fighting it, the more likely it is that Jew hatred will become socially unacceptable and even banished from polite conversation and public interaction. That is truly the goal of this initiative. The proverbial jury, of course, is still out, and many naysayers are voicing their concern. But as of now, I am optimistic about the impact this initiative can and will have. Coming up next, points of view. First up is a column from the Wall Street Journal. It was published on May 17th, 2023, and it's entitled, Houses Without Tomes Aren't Homes, subtitled, You Can't Line a Hallway or a Living Room with E-Books. This column is by Faith Botham. This column is an excellent lament of the vanishing published book. The book with real pages that you really turn, with real bindings that you can sometimes break, and even real letters. This is how the column begins. Books are home. I mean home in the sense of being lost in the reading of them, living within their fictions and intellectual arguments. But even before the actual reading, books are home in the sense that a house isn't a home unless it's lined with books. Or at least that's how it always seemed to me. The worn look of the spines, the warm spread of colors, is what transforms a living space into a dwelling, a place to be, a home. Maybe this feeling is just an after effect of how I was brought up. My parents' house in the Hot Springs, South Dakota, was a ramshackle Victorian filled with books, maybe 15,000 on every topic I could imagine. 19th century literature wrapped around the dining room. The guest bedroom got modern poetry. Science fiction crowded the schoolroom, with reference books relegated to the living room, and children's books lining the sunroom. Mysteries and 20th century theology and more were in the upstairs bedrooms and hallways. To play was to bump into bookshelves. To earn an allowance was to work reshelving the books that got pulled down during dinner discussions, and my father's rapidly fluctuating research into whatever took his fancy. The author now goes on to explain the simple reality that being around books is, in and of itself, an education, that you learn from books even without reading them. And then she concludes, just holding those books, carrying them to their proper shelves was an education. I learned young that I should look in the classics section to reshelve Plato, and the medieval section for Thomas Aquinas, the Renaissance for Dante, and mystery shelves for Rex Stout. My parents joked that they built a library of standard classics, only to find themselves in a world where anyone could download the entire set for free. But an e-book reader with hundreds of titles isn't the same. I suspect we read differently when we read electronic text, but I know we live differently without physical books. They define space with their repository of words. They catch the eye and beckon the imagination. They call us in ways that no electronic text can. Do we ever outgrow our childhood sense of what home should be? Maybe. But when it comes to books, I don't want to. I so appreciate this column. We are a society of books, and as you can probably figure out that my home is filled with books. More than that, we are a people of the book. And the most classic of all books is, of course, the Bible. There is pressure in our new society to de-emphasize the classics. We need to push back against that movement. Books, and especially the Bible, are worth keeping around. Next up is a column by Alan Dershowitz. This column also was published in the Wall Street Journal. It was published on May 21st, 2023. And it's entitled, Elon Musk is right about George Soros and not anti-Semitic. Subtitled, The Hungarian-born billionaire has done more than anyone to turn Americans against Israel. Before we delve into the column, I think that it is important to note that much of the critique of Soros is indeed anti-Semitic. It is anti-Semitism couched in a veneer to make it look reputable. That said, there is certainly, however, room for critique. And Dershowitz tries to thread that needle. This is how Dershowitz begins. Elon Musk has been accused of anti-Semitism because of his criticism and mockery of George Soros. Mr. Soros is Jewish. Mr. Musk isn't. But Mr. Musk stands falsely accused. Mr. Soros is an active participant in politics, and his Jewishness should not shield him from criticism. Further, no single person has done more to damage Israel's standing in the world, especially among so-called progressives, than George Soros. His financial support has multiplied the influence of the two major organizations that have done the most to shift left-wing paradigm against Israel. One of them is Human Rights Watch, which was founded by publisher and human rights advocate Robert Bernstein, 1923 to 2019. For years, Human Rights Watch, HRW, critiqued the denial of human rights by all countries based on two criteria: the seriousness of the violations in any particular nation and the inability of the nation's citizens to protest and remedy such violations. But in 1993, Kenneth Roth became the executive director and turned HRW into an organization that specialized in demonizing Israel. By 2009, the Israel bashing had become so severe that Bernstein wrote, "As the founder of Human Rights Watch, its active chairman for 20 years, and now founding chairman emeritus, I must do something that I never anticipated. I must publicly join the group's critics. Human Rights Watch had as its original mission to pry open closed societies, advocate basic freedoms, and support dissenters. But recently, it has been issuing reports on Israeli-Arab conflict that are helping those who wish to turn Israel into a pariah state." Of course, George Soros is aware of all the accusations of his being an anti-Semite and actual hatred leveled at him. And one of the defenses he often uses is that he himself is a Holocaust survivor. From Budapest, Hungary, both Musk and Dershowitz address this issue. Dershowitz concludes by writing, "Mr. Soros also has had a pernicious influence on American domestic issues, such as funding leftist candidates for district attorney, who have politicized law enforcement. Unlike Mr. Musk, I haven't compared Mr. Soros to Magneto, a Marvel supervillain who, like Mr. Soros, survived the Holocaust. I wouldn't make that comparison because I had never heard of Magneto. But I agree with Mr. Musk that Mr. Soros' acts contribute to fraying the fabric of civilization. Mr. Musk has shown no hostility toward Israel or the Jewish people. Some right-wing anti-Semites have focused on Mr. Soros in promoting anti-Semitic conspiracy theories about the Jews controlling the world. Critics of Mr. Soros should join supporters in condemning such misuse of his Jewish heritage. But this misuse shouldn't deter legitimate criticism of the malign influence Mr. Soros has on the world, irrespective of his being Jewish. Thank you, Mr. Dershowitz. I must admit that I, too, had never heard of Magneto. The entire episode forced me to research the character, and we'll talk more about that in our Picanti section. Coming up, commentary through cartoons, where pictures tell the story. I'm going to show you 8 cartoons, memes, and headlines today. First up is a meme that once again utilizes the TV show Gilligan's Island. It's just a perfect foil. Gilligan's Island is a perfect foil to compare the world of Gilligan's Island to our world today. That's why they use it so often. The Islanders sent out a message in the bottle asking for help. Well, the bottle was returned containing its own message. And in this meme, the note reads, "Stay where you are. America has gone crazy." Interesting commentary. Next up is a cartoon chart entitled "A Small Chart at the Oxymoron Gathering." It goes through a whole slew of contradicting terms, oxymorons, like small crowd, uninvited guest, retired worker, paid volunteer, social outcast, foreign national, relative stranger, natural actor, escaped prisoner, and many more. I find this to be so creative, and really it made me smile. It's the beauty sometimes of humor. This next headline is just hilarious. People make spelling mistakes all the time. I do it all the time also, typos and everything else. But editors and checkers are supposed to catch them, especially in headlines. Apparently, someone fell down on the job, if not one person, then many people, with this headline. The headline reads, "Drink water, avoid alcohol, and find shade as days get wormer." WORMER. That's funny. This next meme is so true, but I never thought about it until I saw the meme. It's the 7-Eleven sign. The cartoonist is telling us that I've been looking at this sign my whole life and never noticed that the Y11 is in capital letters and the N is in lowercase letters. And the meme reads, "I was today's years old when I found this out." He only realized it today, in other words. Unbelievable, but it's true. Capital E's and then the small n. Sadly, Tina Turner has died. Dynamite singing sensation, was truly the queen of rock and roll. This cartoon and next picture are a tribute to her talent and her dynamic, larger-than-life personality. This next cartoon is Zelensky on a tank. The wheels of the tank are the symbols of the United Nations, the United States, the EU, and Interpol. This last cartoon, after that, once again, is about the Arab League and how they've invited Assad back into their organization. It's truly unbelievable. The cartoonist does not see this as a viable match at all, which is one of the right reasons why it keeps coming up in our cartoons even these weeks later. In a moment, more of my own perspective and a few predictions. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu announced that judicial reform isn't dead, but the coalition is making every effort to reach broad agreements. With this statement, Netanyahu was responding to pressure from his party and the further right flank of his coalition that are pushing for reform. In the end, there probably will be a compromise solution with some judicial reforms, and that's important to note. He's made this comment several times already. Volunteers of Ein Gedi Rescue Unit of the Israeli police were called to rescue 2 tourists. The 2 tourists were sitting in Nahal Kedem, relaxing under a water passage, when a flash flood surprised them and swept them into the East Bank. One tourist, who was slightly injured, managed to reach the road, where he stopped a car driven by one of the volunteers of the rescue unit. The second tourist had severe complex injuries and had to be airlifted by helicopter to Hadassah Ein Kerem Hospital in Jerusalem. About 120,000 Israelis celebrated Shavuot by visiting Israel's many nature preserves. The Nature and Parks Authority reported this, that the most popular sites were Gan HaShlosha National Park, Masada, and Ein Gedi Natural Reserve, where these 2 tourists were sitting and they thought they were relaxing. China's burgeoning space program plans to place astronauts on the moon before 2030. China also intends to expand their country's orbiting space station. This information was confirmed by the deputy director of China's space agency while speaking at a news conference. This ambitious plan sets China and the U.S. up for a new space race. America's spending, supply chains, and capabilities are believed to give the U.S. a significant edge over China, at least at present. The U.S. aims to put astronauts back on the lunar surface, back on the moon, by the end of 2025, as part of their renewed commitment to crewed missions. This will be accomplished with the aid of private sector players like SpaceX and Blue Origin. China's space agency also introduced 3 astronauts at the press conference who have already lifted off to the Chinese space station, which China built after being excluded from the International Space Station. The crew that launched into space includes, for the first time, a civilian. This crew replaced a crew that's been orbiting in the station for about 6 months now. China's first manned space mission was in 2003 and made it the 3rd country after the USSR, the United States, to put a person in space. History in the making. Oman Sultan Hatim bin Tariq Al Said visited Tehran for a 2-day visit. The visit, which was reported by the semi-official Tasnim news agency in Iran, occurred 2 days after Muscat, the capital city of Oman, mediated a prisoner swap between Iran and Belgium. The visit took place amid tensions between Iran and the West over Tehran's nuclear program, as well as about allegations that Iran is supplying drones for Russia's war against Ukraine. Tehran denies selling drones to Moscow for use in the Ukraine. They don't deny selling the drones at all. Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, welcomed Oman Sultan and emphasized that Tehran also welcomes better diplomatic relations with Egypt. The Iranian Tasnim news agency has reported that security forces arrested 14 members of a terror team linked to Israel in the northwest of Iran. According to the report, the 14 were attempting to assassinate various Iranians. While this is highly unlikely, it fits into a narrative that Iran, which claims that they are outsmarting Israel at every turn, and that they are catching Israel as Israel attempts to sabotage Iran's internal affairs. A series of websites linked to Iran's presidency have been hacked. The hackers displayed the images of 2 leaders of the exiled opposition group. They also displayed pictures of Islamic Republic's supreme leader and president, and then they were crossed out in the pictures. An internet account describes itself as a group of hackers claimed responsibility for the alleged taking down of the websites. The account is named Gayim San Enguni, which means in Farsi, the language in Iran, it means rise to overthrow. Earlier in the month, this group claimed that it had hacked websites associated with Iran's foreign ministry. Iranian state media and officials did not immediately acknowledge the apparent hack. It is important to point out that Iran has been targeted by a series of embarrassing hacks amid rising tensions over its rapidly advancing nuclear program, as well as their human rights abuses. Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi and Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, who was just recently re-elected, agreed on the immediate start of upgrading diplomatic relations, exchanging ambassadors. The announcement was made by the Egyptian president, who spoke with Erdogan in a phone call congratulating him on his presidential win. Egypt's foreign minister, Sameh Shoukry, visited Turkey in April and met with Turkish counterpart Mevlut Cavusoglu, and it was then that they agreed on a specific time frame to raise the level of their diplomatic relations and to prepare for a summit between the 2 presidents. The presidents may meet again in person very soon. We've been thinking out loud about a lot today. Now that you know what I've been thinking, let me know what you're thinking. Email me at micah@gbstv.org. Tweet me at Micah Halpern. Tell me what you think. Before we end, let me leave you with one piquante piece of information. Did you know that Magneto, the character that we mentioned earlier in a statement by Elon Musk comparing him to George Soros in that column that we spoke about by Alan Dershowitz in the Wall Street Journal? He was a Marvel comic book character created by the great Stan Lee. Stan Lee was a genius, and he was behind great comic book figures like Captain America, Batman, Aquaman, Spider-Man, the Avengers, the Incredible Hulk. And his given name was actually not Stan Lee, it was Stan Lieber, Stanley Marvin Lieber. He actually was born around the corner from where I'm standing right now. Lee created the villain named Magneto, and the character was featured in the 1969 comic book X-Men. Magneto was a powerful mutant, and his superpower was the ability to control magnetic fields. He's an anti-villain, according to Stan Lee.
The humans must be crushed, and I have the power to do it.
Magneto was modeled on Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin, who at the time was the head of the Israeli opposition.
Hey, hot graphics.
Lee also said that he modeled the Professor X hero leader character,
Who's the guy?
the leader of the good characters, on Israel's first Prime Minister, David Ben-Gurion.
After a war, I worked in a hospital, secretly using my mental powers to heal the survivors. A dedicated young aide named Magnus assisted me. Together, we helped patients rediscover the joy of life. We became friends, but for some, a war is never over. Remnants of the army that had so brutally occupied his small country returned, attempting to retake it. We saved what patience we could, revealing, for the first time, to each other, to anyone, our long-hidden mutant powers. But Magnus wasn't through. He'd lost his family when those people overran his country. Consumed by rage, he tried to destroy them. I stopped him, but I'd never seen such a change in a man. I tried to help him deal with his pain. Magnus, your violence will solve nothing. We must use our special gifts to bring peace to mankind.
You're a fool, Charles.
In the comic book, Magneto's name was originally Max Eisenhart. In German and in Yiddish, Eisen means iron. And of course, heart means heart, that is Iron Heart. And you thought comic books were just for kids. Thank you for thinking out loud with me, Micah Halpern. Let's think out loud again next week on JBS.